Excellent. Sorry about that. I just had a last minute hitch to the recording, but everything is in order now. Welcome to our first webinar of 2016. I'm Christine Valenza-Shin. I'm class of '84, and I'm the alumni counselor here at Barnard Career Development. Welcome everybody who's joined us. We have currently 30 people who are in listening mode. Our first webinar of the season, as I said, is the Neuroscience of Career Success, and we're so pleased to have Nora Simpson, CEO of Simpson Strategic Solutions, as our guest presenter. Quick few housekeeping items before I turn things over to Nora. We will take questions throughout the presentation, and you're all muted so that our audio doesn't go crazy, and so you type those questions into the dialog box that should be showing on your screen. Okay, and okay. Second up, this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on our site, and you'll receive a link to that archive in a follow-up email. And finally, our Career Basics webinar series begins next Wednesday with me as the presenter, covering a variety of basic topics, and that will be for the next 6 Wednesdays from 12 to 1 p.m. You don't need to take the full series. You can drop in and out as the topic suits you. Info and registration can be found for that at barnard.edu/CD for career development. And from there, you just click on the alumni page. Okay. So as I said, hold on, let me just see. I'm seeing a little message. Okay, good. As I said, very pleased to welcome Nora Simpson to our webinar presentations. She is an '02 graduate of Columbia College with a major in drama and theater arts, and her career has included work at the United Nations, the Hunger Project, and in the HR consulting and retained executive search industry. She works in her current position with individuals, groups, and companies. She's an in-demand public speaker and the author of a recent book, Get Ahead and Stay Ahead, which is available through her website, getaheadandstayahead.com, information which you should be able to see right there on your screens. I'm really excited that she reached out to me last fall and that we were able to set this up and share her exciting work and experience with Barnard alumni. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Nora.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been doing this work for a really long time, and I think you mentioned I've worked with a lot of companies. I've been so privileged to work with over 100 companies in more than 50 industries, and now over 10,000 individual people who've both worked at these large companies and who've worked with me one-on-one. So it's really exciting to be sharing this work with Barnard. Because I was a theater major, I took so many of my classes at Barnard, and so this feels like a real homecoming for me. So let's get going. So let's talk about what it is when I talk about using the secrets of your own brain to unleash your success at work. So let's see. Yes. So here's a picture of my book. I hope you all like it. It's got some, purple and white elements. Why did I write this book? Well, I had a string of difficult experiences. And in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, which is where I'm originally from. And even though I had had a really quick growing career before 2005. Christine mentioned I worked for the United Nations, and then I worked for this nonprofit called the Hunger Project that used business training and leadership coaching to empower people living on less than $1 a day to end their own hunger and poverty in Africa, Latin America, and South Asia. And then Katrina hit New Orleans, and it just really sent me, over the edge. I really got my heart broken as I watched what was happening in my hometown. And I quit my job and took some time off, and when I came back, I really was not the same person I had been when I left. And I ended up getting fired from 3 jobs in 6 months. Now, at first, I thought that each time I got fired, it was everyone else's fault, right? So I had a bunch of scary bosses, and I had some pretty difficult colleagues, And eventually I realized that, I was the one at the scene of this crime. I had all these other friends who were holding jobs for longer than, a few weeks or a few months. And this led me to finally say, okay, if I'm the one at the scene of the crime, then what do I need to do? I need to look at myself, and I need to look at, I need to look at ways of understanding myself that may be a little bit beyond what's working for me right now. So I went on this journey, and I began to really come to a deeper understanding of the brain and the nervous system. I was so deeply affected by Katrina in a way that we often talk about as, trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it really brought me into a path of learning an awful lot about the brain and the nervous system. And of course, the study of the brain and the nervous system is referred to as neuroscience. So let's talk about neuroscience. So your nervous system, right, which includes your brain and the rest of the nerves in your body and all the connections between them, your nervous system has a really important job, and its main job is to protect you from threats. So it generates feelings, sensations, and interpretations about the world around you. Now, your brain is part of your nervous system, and your brain's job is to specifically take those feelings and sensations in your body and give them interpretations, really put words and thoughts to them. And that's actually what this slide says, right? We take these interpretations, we call them thoughts. So the sensations in your body come first, and then the thoughts that make sense of them actually come next. And that's documented by many neuroscience studies that I'm happy to offer as citations afterwards. So our thoughts when we're in the workplace, right? Because the notion of how our nervous system functions in the workplace is really what got me excited back when I was trying to figure out how not to get fired. Our thoughts tell us that this is who we are, right? Stressed, overwhelmed, piles of papers, trying to do the best we can. But I'm going to invite you to consider that, our bodies still think that this is who we are. So here's our thoughts, right? Our thoughts tell us, oh, I'm this high-powered somebody, but boy, oh boy, am I stressed out. And here's our bodies. And our bodies include, of course, our brain and our nervous system. And so, in terms of what our bodies are programmed for, our bodies are still programmed in many ways for the negotiations required for physical survival in a much more physically threatening world than we live in today. And why is that? Well, we've been human species being the way that we are. We've been this particular Homo sapiens kind of species for over 100,000 years. And it's only been about 50 to 100 years that we've been in this more modern situation where we don't have to be worried for our physical survival as much. Maybe if you're lucky, your family goes back maybe 200 years in some sort of safe urban setting. But most people it's only they and maybe their grandparents and great-grandparents who've had access to the level of safety that's available to us in our modern world. So in ancient times, this caveman body, this cavewoman nervous system that we all have, in ancient times, this nervous system was fine-tuned to be specifically aware of particular kinds of threats like physical attack from wild animals or other warring tribes, threats like natural disasters like forest fires where all you can do is run away, you can't really fight it, and threats like problems in the village, problems within the social order. You hear people say that shame is fear of social exclusion. Well, the thing about social exclusion in, tribal times and cave times is that if the tribe expels you, you are going to die of exposure in the wilderness, right? Unless a wild animal eats you first. So being a part of the tribe, feeling like you belong, is as much, in my set of theories, feeling like you belong is as imperative a survival issue as flying from danger or fighting danger. So we talk about fight or flight or freeze, and I think we also need to acknowledge that tend and befriend, which is often what we do when we're trying to survive in a social situation, is equally important in terms of our survival mechanism. So I invite you to consider that your brain and your nervous system are still looking for this level. These, saber-toothed tigers, forest fires, dangers to the village. Your brain and nervous system are still looking for this level, this kind of threat. But because we all live in this modern world, now we call those threats something different, right? So again, your nervous system's job is to seek out threat, to seek out discomfort. Why? Because its job is to find those threats so that it can defend you. And then your brain's job, your thoughts, your thinking, your rational mind's job is to give names and explanations to those feelings that live outside of you so that you can be defending yourself, right? So we call these threats a bad economy, or we call these threats, a difficult boss, a yeller, an insulter, a manipulator, a negative person. And what I think is really, really remarkable about the way that our nervous system takes in threats within the working world is that your nervous system's job is to generate discomfort, and then your brain's job is to tell you that your discomfort is coming from outside of you, because that's where you're going to be able to defend yourself. And in cave times, it was really important that you were vigilant for these threats. But what I invite you to consider is that your brain is now lying to you. And the way that it lies to you is that it tells you, those things over there that you get uncomfortable when you see them? Well, those things are making you uncomfortable. Those things are the source of your threat. They are the source of your discomfort. And biologically, there's really only one place that your discomfort can come from. Biologically, it comes from inside your body. And the truth is, it comes from inside your body because for 100,000 years, it was necessary that you felt discomfort on a regular basis so that you could be vigilant and aware of potential physical threats. But there are no longer those kinds of physical threats in your world. And yet, your nervous system still functions in this caveman, cavewoman era kind of way. And therefore, I believe that it creates lies that hold you back at work. And so the way that I structured this book, Get Ahead and Stay Ahead, is I structured it around the 9 lies that I believe hold everybody back from being the most successful, most fulfilled, most productive, highest earning, and happiest people that we can be in our careers. So lie number 1 is, if they changed, everything would be okay. Lie number 2 is, maybe I'm no good. Lie number 3 is, work can't be fun. That's a really important one, because in that one we talk a lot about how work can be fun. Lie number 4 is, if I'm procrastinating, something is wrong. Lie number 5 is, my boss is crazy, or really anybody who's got the power to control our money, right? So a client or somebody else that we work with, just, a difficult person is crazy. Lie number 6, I have to be perfect to succeed. Lie number 7, I can't ask for what I want. That one is all about asking for raises. Hint, hint, raises and promotions. Lie number 8, the problem is the economy. And lie number 9 is one of my most favorite ones to talk about, because even when you overcome everything else and you get that raise, you get that promotion, you learn all your productivity techniques, you get to be wonderful with people, one of the most insidious things that our brains and nervous systems tell us to be afraid of is, if I succeed, somehow that will mean that either others fail or I'll be rejected. So there's this innate fear of success that comes with our tribal identity and our tribal survival imperative. And I really love to kind of take people into what that fear of success is really about and how to overcome it in a way that's positive and brings you a deeper sense of connection with others rather than a feeling of disconnection with others. So let's talk about why I put together the lies this way. So the other thing that you really need to understand about the nervous system is that it's not just the product of 100,000 years of human survival in the wild. And obviously, we evolved into Homo sapiens from other versions of humans, of hominid species. So, we have much longer than 100,000 years of evolution that goes into our DNA. But something else that I think it's really important to talk about when we're understanding the neuroscience of our career is that we evolved to have our nervous systems develop in a very particular way. And so as much as our nerves and brains function according to the rules of the game of cave times, they also are some of the most adaptable, actually they are the most adaptable brains and nervous systems on the planet. So in order to explain how that adaptability works, I'm going to talk a little bit about how children relate to nervous systems, particularly babies. So if you look at this picture on your screen, this is actually a picture of me and my son. My son's name is Raphael, and he's 6 months old. In this picture, I think he's maybe 3 months old. And that's me looking like a tired mom because he certainly likes to be creative about his sleep patterns. So we all started out as babies, right? We're all born, sometime or another. And when we're born, we actually have the least developed brain and the least developed nerve connections across our bodies of any animal in the animal kingdom. And I know that might come as a surprise to some people, but even kittens and puppies and other kinds of little animals can do more of the kinds of adult actions they're going to take once they're fully grown than human babies can do when human babies are born. So the difference between a human infant at birth and a human adult is much greater than the difference between any other infant animal and the grown-up version of that animal. And that's actually a really positive thing. It's really wonderful that we are born so underdeveloped, because what it means is that we develop our entire system, literally our brain and nervous system, we develop our entire nervous system in negotiation with the environment that we grow up in. So let's talk about synapses. So synapses are the connections between brain cells that form in our brains when we're very small, and all of our thoughts and all of our feelings travel across these connections throughout our brain and throughout our body. So at birth, you're born with a very, very small number of synapses. Your brain looks almost like an empty electrical box. And what's really remarkable is that you as a child, and every other baby unless they have something really, really wrong with them, but almost every human baby in the world is growing synapses at a rate of 700 new synapses per second in the year of life. Can you imagine what that means? So 700 times 60 is how many synapses you grow in 1 minute, right? And then how many minutes are in an hour, how many hours are in a day, how many days are in the first month, first year, first few years of life. So we're talking about trillions of synapses being generated at a breakneck pace. And what ends up happening is that your synapses grow and grow and grow at this breakneck pace in the first 3 years. They slow down a little bit from age 3 to about age 11. And then around age 11, you start to kind of pare down the synapses that you don't need. Your brain goes into a mode where it's looking to become more efficient. And what does this mean? What does it mean? What are the implications of growing all these synapses from 0 to 11, growing all these nerve connections across your body? Just to give you an example, my son is now 6.5 months old, but he's not ticklish yet, because you don't actually grow the nerve endings that you need to be ticklish until you're about 7 or 8 months old, right? So it's just really remarkable, and it's something that I've been thinking about since long before I was a mom, and the implication of growing so many of your synapses, growing so many of your connections, your capacities for thoughts and feelings and memories and comprehension and interpretation across your early childhood. What that means is that human beings are by far the most adaptable beings on the planet, because we grow up in adaptation to whatever environment we grow up in. But what it also means is that here in our modern world, right, when we are adults, our adult programming, our adult perceptions, our adult capacities for understanding when we walk into the working world are deeply, deeply influenced by our childhood experiences. Now, in cave times, that wasn't such a bad thing, right? You grew up knowing, if you were living on the savannas of Africa, for instance, you grew up knowing that, lions are dangerous and, you should stay away from stampedes. And, if you grew up in the Pacific Northwest of North America, maybe you grew up knowing that grizzly bears were dangerous and that you maybe went, go swimming in the river and, catch some salmon, and salmon was a really yummy food. But it was really unlikely that the things you grew up learning from 0 to 11 and beyond were going to change radically from childhood to adulthood during cave times. In fact, it was unlikely that they were going to change even during, modern civilization times before electricity, right? You grew up on the farm and you've lived your whole life on a farm. But nowadays, the information that we learn about survival in childhood is radically different from the tools that are going to set us up for the maximum success in adulthood. So at this point, I just want to stop for a second and ask Christine, did you want to jump in here? I know you've read the book. I know you've had some time to think about a lot of these things. Did you want to make any comments or ask any questions that may have been submitted by attendees before we go on?
At the moment, we don't have any questions, and people seem to be paying pretty close attention. So I'll just let you go on.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So let's talk about synapse growth and what really helps your synapses develop healthfully, and what gets in the way of healthy synapse growth. And then we'll talk about how that affects you for the rest of your life. So synapse growth, developing a healthy brain in a child, developing a healthy nervous system, to help them negotiate their environment for not just childhood, but for the rest of their lives. Really, if you boil it down to just about every early childhood development study that I've read, talks about the idea that children need stimulation, right? So they need to be learning things. They need to be engaged in their environment, colors, shapes, letters, numbers, words, reading, etc. They need stimulation and they need nurturing, right? So we all need to be learning and we all need to feel loved, right? And because all adult experiences are filtered through this childhood programming, I'm going to offer you that the stimulation and nurturing you received as a child is going to deeply influence how you understand your adult experiences. So I'm just going to take a look at what I wrote here. I see. And the other thing that I love about this idea of thinking about childhood programming with stimulation and nurturing is that stimulation and nurturing remain incredibly powerful ingredients for your brain for the entirety of your life. So when you arrive in adulthood and you find yourself in a situation that may not necessarily work for you, I'm not saying that you should go back and, ask someone to breastfeed you or at the age of 36 or something. I'm not saying that you should go back and read children's books. What I am saying is that there's a version of stimulation and there's a version of nurturing that's appropriate for where you are in your life, at 25, at 46, at 34, at 58, wherever it is, that will actually help you shift the programming that you're seeking to shift so that you can experience slightly different things in adulthood. So let me talk a little bit more about how that works, assuming my computer is going to switch slides. Come on, computer. Let's do it. There we go. How? Yes, that's what I was talking about. Okay, so we're talking about, because we are so influenced by our childhood experiences, when we decide that we want to make a different experience for ourselves in our careers in adulthood, here is the basic formula for what you want to be looking at. So first, you want to identify the perceptions that aren't working for you. And the way to do this is you want to be looking at, what's the situation that's really not working in my life? Is the situation that I think that there's no upward mobility in my current job role at the company or the organization where I work? Is it that you're really convinced that the economy, is shrinking jobs in your industry and there's just not a lot of opportunity there? Is it that you seem to be just having a really crummy experience with a really difficult boss? There's a million different situations that could be happening that aren't working for you, and I just want to invite you to consider that whatever it is that's not working for you, that's a perception, right? Because none of us knows the true nature of reality. It's pretty impossible for any one human to understand what, the wholeness of what's going on. It's very accepted in neuroscience circles, this idea that, we don't really see about 90% of the things that are happening around us at any one time. So you're only taking in about 10% of what's happening. So even though your brain is designed to tell you that 10% you're taking in is the full 100%, because that's another sort of lie of the nervous system, even though your brain is designed to tell you this, what I'm going to invite you to do is I'm going to invite you to take whatever it is that you're convinced is 100% true, and I'm going to invite you to call that a perception and just say, this perception that I have of this situation is not working. And then I want you to ask yourself, what does this perception remind me of? What does the situation remind me of? Does it remind me of someone I had a really difficult relationship with in childhood? Does it remind me of an experience I had when I was younger, whether it was 10 years ago when I was just in my 30s or my 20s, or does it remind me of something that happened when I was a teenager or when I was a small child? And then here's the really, really important thing. As you identify what this particular situation reminds you of, I want you to think about the survival perceptions that you took on when you were in this original situation. And I want you to bring love and appreciation to those survival perceptions. So I'm going to give you an example from my own life. It's actually in the book. Part of the story of this book is that, I got fired from 3 jobs in 6 months, and I started looking at myself, and I started looking at my own nervous system, and and then I got a 4th job. And the story of kind of how I got that job and what it took to kind of weave my way through is actually in the book. There's also plenty of stories of different experiences I've had with clients and what the clients go through. But this early time in my career when I was sort of figuring this stuff out is actually a really important time in terms of how I created the tools. So I've included quite a bit about it. So I got myself this job in this new industry I'd never heard of. It was called executive recruiting. It was part of the HR consulting world. And I was hired by this lady that I just thought was the coolest, smartest, sassiest, neatest, like New York smart, competent lady I'd ever met. I just thought she was terrific. I couldn't wait to work for her. She just really just made me laugh, and she was obviously really successful and fabulous, and I just couldn't wait to work for her. And I got to work that first day, and I got to work really productively and really attentively. And within 3 days, she had promoted me. I mean, I was just really flying high with this lady. And then 4 weeks into the job, she called me into her office, and she said, "Nora, everybody hates you. You need therapy. And if you don't shape up by next week, I'm firing you." And, I could not wrap my head around how I suddenly found myself in this situation with someone who would think it was appropriate to tell me that everyone in the company hated me, which of course turned out not to be true, but this is the kind of thinking that this woman brought to her experience, right? She was a very black and white thinker. And, it was a really painful experience to have this lady tell me, "Oh, everyone hates you," and she said a bunch of, colorful insults in that meeting. And I remember just telling myself, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, you'll get through this, you'll call some friends, you'll get through this. And as I left the office that night and began calling friends and going, what on earth is going on? How do I live through this? How do I overcome this? One of the things that became really powerful for me was that I got in touch with how much that experience reminded me of interactions I had had with my mom when I was a child. And I love my mom, and she's a Barnard grad, so I don't ever want to say anything nasty about her. But she's a human being, just like everyone. And now that I've been a mom for 6 months, I can tell you, motherhood is really hard. when I was a kid, I thought my mom was the smartest, funniest, coolest, sassiest lady I ever knew. I loved her so much, and she had a temper. And every now and again, her temper would flare up, and she would say things that were just really, really painful for me. And luckily, she and I have talked through this stuff, and we've healed a lot of it. But I would say, back then, I don't know that I had really healed the effect of that experience on me from childhood. And so one of the most important things that I had to start doing as I was coming to terms with how much my relationship with this particular boss reminded me of my relationship with my mom was that I had to start bringing appreciation and love to the ways that I survived those difficult moments with my mom. And the ways that I survived those moments is I did things children aren't supposed to do, right? I comforted her, I hugged her and told her what a great mom she was. I did a lot of things that were out of, that were not necessarily appropriate for a situation between a child and a parent. And, I brought a lot of that into adulthood with me, and unfortunately it did not work with me. It did not work for me once I got to the working world. It turned out to be a real obstacle. And as I came to see what these obstacles were, one of the things I learned as I did all this studying of neuroscience and reached out to all these wonderful people who had so much love to give and so much wisdom to share, was that I really had to come to a place of love and appreciation for these old defense mechanisms inside me that were now making me very unproductive at work. So I had to really get that these survival perceptions got me through tough times. And then I, like so many of my clients after me and like so many of the people that I've had the great privilege to work with, then I had to choose a new way of being that I would like to engage in. And I didn't know whether or not I could do it, but I absolutely knew that I needed to find something else besides being terrified and, being a martyr and being angry and being resentful and all of these things I was bringing into work with this lady who, who didn't really know how to be a very loving or mentoring boss. So then I surrounded myself with really smart, wise people who had a lot of love to give. And I have to say, I called a lot of people. I called tons and tons of people. I was very lucky because I was already a member of a bunch of support groups. And I just remember calling all these people in these support groups until I found the ones that I felt most comfortable with and I felt had the best wisdom for me. And it wasn't that they were the smartest people who had the highest IQs or something. It was that they were the ones that I felt the safest with. And I talk a lot about this in the book, that what you're really looking for as you build a tribe, right, because we are tribal beings, and we did evolve to survive best in tribe, right, and in fact to succeed best in tribe. As you build a tribe, and I talk a lot about how to do that and, how to use your tribe to really support your career success, as you're reaching out and building your tribe, you really want to be looking for the people who you admire, the people who you feel comfortable with, the people who you feel safe with, and then surrounding yourself with those people and reinforcing the healthiest and most loving and most nurturing and most growth advocating behaviors and commitments that you can make for yourself. So, of course, we need to find information that supports these new chosen perceptions. So I'm going to put another plug in for my book. My book is chock full of new information that a lot of people have never seen before and very particular practical tools that you can use to put this information into practice. But when you actually use my book, you want to be talking to other people about it. So that's why I've really been encouraging people when they buy a book to buy a second copy and give it to a friend, and see if your friend wants to read it with you, because it's such a tribe-oriented book. So as I page through these slides, Christine, what I'm seeing is that I've prepared a few ideas. About, or a few stories about people, about how people can use different tools from the book. I can talk more about the different tools from the book. I can talk more about stories, or we can open it up to questions. What do you think is best?
Why don't we do at least one example to just to sort of show how it works and then see if there's questions from there.
Sure, sounds great. So as you guys saw, I talked a lot about building a tribe to support your new choices. So one of the tools, this is an example from the book, one of the tools that I talk about in the book about building your tribe is I say, you can be really proactive about this. You can literally make a list of the people that you think would be good candidates for your tribe. So some of the qualities that I really encourage you to think about when you're making this list of people for your tribe is people you feel safe with, people you have fun with, people whom you admire, right? You admire how they behave or you admire what they achieve. And then you really can go through and call them, just on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be once a year. It really can be once a week. And maybe ask them out to coffee every 1 to 3 months. And start talking about your goals and your dreams and desires, and definitely start asking them about their lives. And this is something that I did quite a bit when I was working with this woman, because one of the things that I decided to do as I was learning how to stay calm around someone who had this, this very explosive temper, and learning how to be productive even in the face of her difficult personality. One of the things I realized about 4 months into working for her, because thank goodness I didn't end up getting fired. I ended up, building my tribe and using these tools to keep the job and to ultimately become a very successful person at her firm. I actually became the #1 recruiter in her firm. So that I was the recruiter responsible for finding the candidates for almost every search that we completed. And 4 months into this job, what I realized was that I had accepted the job at a rate of salary that was just extremely low, and that it was really time to ask for a raise from this lady. And let me tell you, it made me very nervous to have to ask for a raise from this boss who I knew had a real temper on her, and who I had worked so hard just to find some inner peace. So that I could walk into work and not feel like I was walking into a war zone. So I really used this tool of tribe when I realized that I needed to ask for a raise. And I remember that because I was in all these support groups, I had a lot of people's numbers that I could call. I remember that I called over 100 people to ask them for advice on what it is to ask for a raise. And I did this over about 6 weeks, so it wasn't like it was one night or something. I really took my time. And do you know that about 70 of the 100 people told me not to ask for the raise? So it wasn't like, everybody in the whole tribe was perfect and fabulous and whatever. 70% of the people I talked to really said, if you've only been there 4 months, maybe it's not the right time, Or they said, well, gee, I just don't know. It sounds scary. This lady sounds really tough. Maybe you should just look for another job. I'm not sure if this is the right time. Everybody that I talked to in that 70% had a good reason why I might not want to ask for the raise. But here's something I found really, really interesting. Of the 70 people or so who told me not to ask for the raise, when I would ask them, well, by the way, okay, thanks for your feedback, but by the way, how are you doing in your job, or how are you doing in your career? Almost all of those people would say, oh, well, it's not great right now. The economy is really, really bad, or I just got fired, or I just got laid off, or I work for a really difficult person. It's really tough. Thanks for asking, Nora. Here, I'm going to tell you all my problems. And I'd hear an earful of how difficult things were for them. And I found that very interesting, because then there were the people who did encourage me to ask for the raise. And there were only about 30 of them of the 100, right? So if you're not going to call 100 people, because I'm a little weird that I was willing to call 100 people in 6 weeks, but if you're not going to call 100 people, if you're going to call 10 people, if you're going to call 20 people, you might want to pay attention to the idea that the people who do encourage you, the people who do believe in you, might be in the minority. And that's okay, because those 30 people that I spoke to who said, Nora, go for it. I think you're worth every penny. Or, Nora, I think what you need is a real strategy here. So I'm going to send you to this salary website where you're going to punch in your location and your duties and your title, and I really want you to look at this website, and then I want you to take the mid-range number, and then I want you to add 10%, and they had these really elaborate instructions for me sometimes. And then other people just said, no, you know what, I believe in you, and go for it, and just just meditate and you'll be guided. You know, I got a whole range of very loving and supportive advice from these 30 people. And the thing I found fascinating about those 30 people that I talked to was that when I asked them about how their careers were going, they'd say things like, oh, well, you know, I'm working really hard and, you know, I think I'm making really good progress. You know, it's never as fast as I would like it to be, but, you know, I think it's doing really well. They were always people who were committed to staying positive. They were always people who were committed to their own growth, right? They were always people who were really willing not to be tempted down the path of blaming others for situations they didn't like. They were always really eager to take ownership and responsibility of the situations in their lives. And I paid really close attention to that because I realized that I wanted to be like these people. I wanted to be like the people who were brave and courageous and willing to question themselves and willing to, you know, go into uncomfortable places in order to grow. And so it was those people I listened to about the raise and about whether or not to ask. And it took 6 weeks of talking to people and you know, getting advice. And I finally realized that because this woman was so unpredictable, this woman who reminded me a lot of the mom I knew when I was a kid, because this woman was so unpredictable, I needed to do all the work that I could until I was 100% peaceful with asking for the money. And that was something I really noticed about my own kind of internal life, was that in my nervous system, my thoughts, my feelings, my interpretations, I felt this incredible sense of anxiety about money, this incredible sense of anxiety about my own value and my own worth. And I realized that until I was 100% comfortable with the number that I was going to ask for, as though it were like a perfectly peaceful thing, like the sky is blue and Nora is asking for $72,000. And that was the number that my friend had helped me figure out. And at the time I was only making $40,000. And so I was making $40,000 a year at the time, and I was going to go in there and ask for 72. And when I first wrapped my mind around that, I thought, oh gosh, this is the stupidest, craziest thing I've ever done. Why am I going to do this? And I would just, I just called a lot of those 30 people back and I said, hey, guess what? I'm going to ask for $72,000. It's almost a doubling of my salary. I know it sounds crazy, but what do you think? And again, those 30%, those 30 people, they were really supportive, and they said, Nora, you're not just worth $72,000, you're worth $1 million. Or, I think $72,000 is a really legitimate number for what you're doing as a recruiter. I think you should go for it. And they just had a million different ways to reassure me. And there finally came this day when I was perfectly at peace with the number. And I was just like, yeah, okay, 72. Like whenever this lady's ready to have this conversation with me, she wasn't the type of person that you could put a note on her calendar and just have the meeting with her. Whenever she's ready, and I'm going to be really open, and I'm going to allow my intuition to really guide me as to when is the right time to ask. And sure enough, within a few days, once I felt peaceful with that number 72, within a few days, the opportunity came. It was very clear to me that this was the time to ask her. And, she said, okay, I get it. You want to raise, you've done a good job. I get it. How much do you want? And I said, I'd like $72,000. And you know what she did, Christine? She laughed in my face. And it wasn't just a giggle. Sorry, what'd you say?
I said, what a surprise.
What a surprise. She laughed in my face. It wasn't just a giggle. It was like a loud, cackle out of, a Disney movie about witches or something. It was just like open mouth, full-on cackle. And it was just really clear that this was an absolutely ludicrous number in her world. But because I had done the work to get really peaceful with the number, I just sat quietly and I waited for her to stop laughing. And she did stop laughing. And do you know what she said after that? She said, I can do 50. And I said, deal. And we shook on it. And right there, right then, I got a 25% raise from the most difficult boss I've ever had.
Nice job.
It was fantastic. And, when I told the story, what ended up being many, many times after, it dawned on me that because I was so peaceful with the number, because I had reached out to my tribe, because I had really done all this prep work for my internal perception, my internal nervous system experience, I didn't run out of the room crying when she laughed at me. I didn't even shrink in my chair, right? I didn't let it humiliate me. I just let her have her experience. And then when she was kind of finished having her experience, I let her negotiate her own discomfort and her own kind of sense that there was something she was willing to give me, since I was sitting there quietly waiting for her to respond, other than laughing. So that's one example of how these things, how these tools have worked in my life. There's tons more examples in the book.
We've got,
and now,
sorry, we have a
go
question.
ahead. Great, I love questions. Yay, questions.
Steffi wants to know, do the people in your tribe share the same career goals or are in similar fields?
Great question, Steffi. At least for me and my tribe, because I really try to practice what I preach, I've got some people who are very much in my same kind of industry, but I would say most of my people are not. It's not necessary, in my world, it's not necessary to have people who are doing exactly what I'm doing or who are living through the exact experiences that I'm having with, a certain kind of boss or a certain kind of industry. It's much more important to me to find people who are looking for growth and hungry for growth. Nowadays when I talk to folks in my tribe, I have someone in my tribe who's actually a former client, and he's a Tony Award nominated Broadway composer. He wrote an endorsement for my book. I promise you, being someone who is an author and a speaker and a business consultant is very different from being a Broadway composer. But we have remarkable conversations where we each support each other around, the particular growth actions that we're looking to take in our unique industries. Is that a sufficient answer for you, Steffi? Hopefully Steffi is cool.
Yeah, so she's probably typing. Oh, yes. She says, yes, I see. Another question. How does one start to deal with the perception that one is too old to start a new career or a business?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful question. Yay. I love that question.
Do you want some detail? There's a little.
Sure.
She's
I'd love more detail.
An in-house lawyer and business exec at a small company, and she wants to open her own business, not in law. She's afraid it's too late to start this process.
Am I allowed to ask this person how old she is?
54.
54, you're a baby. Oh my God. First of all, I want you to know, I don't know the name of the person, but I want you to know that I've actually coached people on starting businesses in their 80s. So 54 is very, very young in my world. And I would offer you, and I've coached plenty of people in their 50s and 60s and 70s, and I would offer you that it's not a lie that there are people out there who will look at you and say, oh, you're not young and hungry, or you're not this or that. That's not a lie. That might exist. That might happen to you. But the good news is that there are so many more people out in the world who will be excited about the value that you have to bring if you are bringing that value and articulating that value, and most importantly, delivering on your promises, right? So it's one thing to articulate what you're good at. It's another to very, very skillfully deliver it. And I'll offer you that a lot more people will trust you because you have years of experience, because you have years of wisdom of just being, on the planet, negotiating difficult situations. It's hard. It's hard to live. It's hard to make it through the day and be a healthy, happy person, and I think we need to give ourselves credit for that. So I would offer you that in terms of perceptions, yes, the survival perception inside you that does not want you to exceed your limitations, that does not want you to go outside your comfort zone, is going to manufacture 1,000 reasons why it's a really bad idea to leave your comfort zone. And what you want to remember is that survival perception was really accurate when, your ancestors were living in caves. But we live in a very safe world today. And so there's really particular ways you can take responsible action, right? I wouldn't spend your life savings on this new business, because most new businesses make some mistakes and spend money on the wrong things before they get it right. It's really rare to spend money on the exact right things and get tons of clients the first minute that you're in business. So I would definitely, maybe, save up a lot, maybe don't quit your job right away, and take slow, deliberate action around learning what it is to articulate your value and find people who will pay you for what it is that you want to go into business for. And what I want to remind you is that sometimes it takes people a few years before they really figure out what their sweet spot is in terms of articulating their value and making money as a business owner. But let's say it took you 5 years to work up to the same level of income that you're at now or higher. If you want to ask, I've heard people say, Nora, do you know how old I'll be if it takes me 5 years to do that, right? Do you know how much time will have passed? I'll be so old when this happens. And I always say, well, you'll be the exact same age you would be if you had not taken this risk, right? So would you rather be 59 and running a successful business that you've grown slowly and deliberately over time, or would you rather be 59 and still wondering what it would be like to start a business?
So we've got about 8 minutes left. Did you want to sort of go through the last few slides, and then we'll take a couple more of the questions that are coming in?
Sure. Let's see what my slides are. Since I've gotten so involved in the questions, of course, I'm having a little amnesia here. So let's find out what I put in this presentation. Oh, I have to put this back. Okay. Ooh, this is a good one. So as we are taking on these new perceptions, the perceptions that we really want to embrace for our success, one of the most important things we can remember, and this is really great, especially for the two people who've already asked their questions, one of the most important things we can remind ourselves of is that all big, important achievements are made of tiny little actions, right? So remember that your nervous system, in wanting to protect you from, risks and losses and pain and, threats, will see big achievements or big things you've never done before as huge, overwhelming obstacles, right? So the huge, overwhelming obstacles will show up in your perception, but only small action is how we actually overcome those obstacles, right? So one of the tools I talk about in Chapter 4, if I'm procrastinating something is wrong, is that for most people, it's really hard to start a new action, an action that's not part of their routine, that's not part of something that they're used to doing. But it turns out that difficulty of starting that new action, it usually only stays uncomfortable or stays difficult for about 3 minutes. And after those 3 minutes, as long as you don't interrupt the new action, as long as you don't say, oh, this is really hard, I'm just going to take a break to check my email, or I'm going to take a break to look at my phone or check Facebook or whatever, as long as you stay connected and attentive and working on that action for those 3 minutes, about the time of the 3-minute mark, you'll get more comfortable in your skin as you're doing this action. And I find this to be remarkable. It's remarkable when it's things that feel really new and really overwhelming to us. It's remarkable when it's things that are relatively easy but for some reason are emotionally confronting because they represent some sort of big growth step that we've been resisting taking for a while. And most people don't think at first that I'm telling the truth about this 3-minute bridge, but I'm going to offer you that what happens is the 3-minute bridge resets to 0 every time you restart, every time you distract yourself and then restart. So most people don't realize that when they have a difficult task to do, they don't actually sit down and live through that 3 minutes of discomfort unbroken. They tend to sit down and then distract themselves, or sit down and then think about something else, or sit down and lose focus. And if you sit down and lose focus or distract yourself or get involved in 5 other things over and over and over, it's very easy to say, wow, I just spent 6 hours trying to do this difficult task, and I haven't gotten very far in it at all, and the whole time it was just really torturous. And what I'm going to offer you is that it's not the whole time it's torturous. It's just the time, every time you restart that task, you restart your discomfort at 0. And if you can give yourself the tools to just sit through the discomfort without losing focus for those first 3 minutes, you'll be amazed at how quickly the task actually becomes a more comfortable experience. And get this, your 3-minute time of discomfort, the more you practice not distracting yourself, your 3 minutes will actually shrink. And so for most people I know who use the 3-minute bridge awareness and tool on a regular basis to put themselves into doing uncomfortable new actions that, of course, are required for growth. For most people I know, they're able to shrink that 3-minute bridge to about 60 to 90 seconds within a few weeks. And I know some people who have shrunken it to, 15 to 30 seconds over several months or even several years. So it's always going to be there. But, for me personally, I've been practicing with it so much. These days it's about 10 or 15 seconds for me. And I think it's just really helpful for people to understand what the times, what the seconds and minutes really are, because it really kind of gives you a new power over your own nervous system, your own addiction to distraction, etc. And the other thing that I'm a really big fan of when you're taking new action and you're expanding your comfort zone is practicing with something I call mini units. And mini units are a tool I talk a lot about in Chapter 6 because, I really believe that people think that in order to be successful, they have to be perfect. And one of the reasons I love mini units is that it's really hard to obsess over whether or not you're hitting the keyboard for 10 seconds perfectly or not. So I always tell people, the first mini unit action you have to take might be fingers on keyboard or fingers on phone pad, dial pad of the phone. And that tends to really throw a wrench in the negative, self-sabotaging stuff that our nervous system creates to keep us from growing and to keep us from doing the uncomfortable actions that are going to help us grow. And I'm all about that. Like, all I want to do is interrupt your nervous system when it's trying to hurt you or it's trying to sabotage you and give you access to it when it's very available for supporting your growth. What do you think, Christine? Are there any more questions?
There's another question, and
Great.
We've got about 2 minutes left, although if people are able, I don't know if you're able to stay for a few extra minutes if there's more questions. But
yeah, I'm happy to stay a little bit after. That's fine.
Excellent. So here's the question I have in the queue. What advice would you offer someone who has recently been fired?
Oh, great question. Wow, these are fantastic questions. So the first thing that happens when you're fired is usually you feel bad. And I want to really encourage you to give yourself permission to feel your feelings, whatever they are. The one thing about feeling your feelings, though, is that you really want to feel your feelings with your tribe. You don't want to be alone with your feelings, especially when they're negative and sad feelings, which most of us tend to feel when we lose a job. Maybe you've heard the saying, your head is a dangerous neighborhood. It's really easy for us to pile sadness and pain, upon sadness and pain, upon sadness and pain in our heads. It's really easy to go into a vortex when we're feeling really crummy and alone after a difficult situation. So the first thing you want to do is you want to reach out for help. Some wise saying I heard a long time ago was that, pain shared is pain cut by half, and joy shared is joy doubled. So let's cut your pain in half, and let's reach out to somebody you feel really safe with, somebody you feel really understands you, and someone who you feel won't judge you. And, just say, hey, I'm feeling terrible. I got fired. Can I just lean on you? Can I just come over to your house and get a hug? Or can we go out to coffee? Just to first and foremost acknowledge that you're going to have difficult feelings about it, and it's totally fine that you have those feelings, right? Feelings aren't facts, but they are real. They do pass, but they also deserve to get attention. Then I would say, let's look at the situation. Now, this is only after you've done all the grieving and received all the comfort that you absolutely deserve to receive, because you deserve to receive tons and tons of it. But once you've received that comfort and you're feeling at least loved, if not empowered for the next step. Once you're feeling loved, then the opportunity is to look at this situation in the job where you were just fired and say, what was going on here, and really allow yourself to acknowledge that there can be multiple levels of reason for why you were fired. So it might be that you actually didn't like the job that much, and maybe the job wasn't really a job where you wanted to be working, whether it was that there were difficult people there, or it was an industry that you weren't crazy about, or I have a friend, she was just telling me, she said, wow, Nora, your book and everything sounds so great. I'm really proud of you. I'm really happy for you. You sound like you're doing really fulfilling work. And I said, yeah, it really is. And she said, I've been a lawyer since 2006. I went to law school, et cetera, and really unhappy as a lawyer, and she was just saying, I've been at this firm for this many years and I'm really unhappy. And I said, wow, I hear you, and have you considered, looking at other options for your career? And I've known other folks who were unhappy in their career, unhappy in their industry, and when they got fired, at first it was really scary because, of course, when you get fired, you worry about where your money's going to come from and all of that. But then there was a little bit of a sense of empowerment because they went, you know what, I never liked doing that anyway. And, if there's anybody you guys know who's been fired recently, not to be a total, sales pitch woman here, but definitely buy them my book because there's a lot in the first few chapters about how I went from having been fired from all these jobs to finding a path into what would become a very positive experience in a brand new role in a brand new industry for me. And so you really want to be looking at all the different possible issues. It may be that you love your industry. It may be that you love the functions that you were responsible for completing at your job, but you had really difficult people that you worked with. Fine, great. Human rejection is God's protection. The universe has done you a favor. Now let's go find you some wonderful people to work with, right? And so I would say once you've gotten the comfort for your grief, because of course losing a job can be a very grief-inducing experience, the next step is to really get active and curious and start to ask yourself, what wasn't quite right about this job, and how can I do better? How can I find a better place for me? And how can I really take on a positive attitude and find people who will support my positive attitude and support, offer me learning and offer me opportunities for growth so that I can, take those actions to ultimately land in a much better place. And I really believe that when things happen that we don't like, it's because something better is coming along, and you have the option to believe that too. And if you take action consistent with it, which is to do the work, to show up, to learn, to grow, to take the uncomfortable action, you'll have a life beyond your wildest dreams in a very short amount of time.
I want to just jump in to say that in my role as alumni counselor for Barnard alumni that I do speak to Barnard alumni who've been fired, laid off, and I completely agree with that process. No matter how far along or how long it's been, they almost always have to start with the feeling part, sort of telling me the story and expressing some of that emotion before they're then ready to transition to talking about more, practical steps to take. And also if you're an unhappy lawyer, you also have a lot of company in your Barnard alumni field, and I talked to a lot of unhappy lawyers, but some happy ones too. So just to reinforce some of what Nora's saying, I've got a comment from Robin. I'm not sure what slide she was referring to, but she said, a big smiley face for this slide. I am doing a job search now after having been laid off and trying to transition into a new job that has a better culture for me. That question came up, that comment came up a while ago. I'm getting sort of a weird order here, but just wanted to share that. We are over time. Some people are starting to drop out, and please feel free to leave if you need to, but let me just go back and check if I've got more questions coming up. Okay, that was back at the beginning. Okay, we've got a quick one, I think. Quick answer. Does Nora offer private coaching? Asks everyone.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. If you go to www.simpsonstrategic.com, which is the website for my private coaching, or honestly, you can go to getaheadandstayahead.com, which is the website on this list, and just sign up for my email. Sign up for the email list, and you should, you should be able to get in touch with me. All my information.
Send contact information you'll get a follow-up email tomorrow after the webinar, and I'll send contact information so that you can follow up with Nora in one-on-one if you'd like.
Absolutely.
Another question: from a biological perspective, may it happen that these new self-inducted beliefs clash with the ones we own from our childhood? Can we continuously lie to ourselves?
From a biological perspective, it's highly probable that these new induced beliefs will clash with the ones from childhood. Most of our parents didn't know how to give us the kinds of childhood training that would set us up best for a positive, healthy, responsible, action-oriented, growth-oriented approach to career, honestly. this is what I find anyway, and I've worked with, thousands of people. I've worked with plenty of Ivy League graduates. I've worked with plenty of people, who never graduated high school, and everyone in between. So one of the things that most people have in common is that they don't get terribly healthy beliefs from their childhood experience. They usually get some healthy beliefs, but it's always mixed in there with some difficult ones. And let's talk about kind of where that comes from. So first of all, it's your job in childhood to look for trauma and to look for threat, because your nervous system is looking for what defenses to create in you so that it can assure your survival. So everyone, even the people with the best parents, had some trauma or some difficulty in childhood, and most of us had fair to middling parents. Some of us had really terrible parents, but everybody had difficulty in childhood. You don't get out of childhood unscathed. Childhood is designed to scathe you. It is designed to create times when you feel crummy so that you will learn how to defend yourself from crumminess, because the assumption of your nervous system development is that there are threats and there are crummy things out there that need to be defended against. So that's the first thing we should say. The second thing is, can you lie to yourself? In response to your question, can we keep lying to ourselves? Here's the thing. Your childhood perceptions are no more true or false than any other perception out there. Because no perception is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and no understanding will ever take into account a full understanding of the world. I believe that the best chance we have at the best possible level of understanding that's available to human beings is to be in a deep and an interactive relationship with the notion that we absolutely do not know and cannot know most of what's going on and most of what's out there for us. And if we can bravely engage in the notion that we do not know most of what's out there, the next step, I believe, and we're getting into a very ontological, philosophical space here, but the next step after coming to terms with the fact that, the best we can say is that we don't know most things, right? Once we get that we don't know, from that not knowing place, we have a choice. We can either choose to say, well, okay, let me do the most responsible, highest integrity, most generous, most honest, most self-fulfilling things I can do, with the assumption that the world is also a friendly, positive place, right? And I don't know how friendly, I don't know how positive until I'm willing to get out of the house and show up for it, right? And then what I try to do is every time I encounter something that's a negative experience, because life is filled with mixed experiences, right? Life is filled with ups and downs, and that's just part of life. That I think we can all acknowledge is what we've all experienced so far. When I reach a down moment, what I try to tell myself is, this is an opportunity for learning. This is an opportunity for growth. When I reach an up moment, what I try to tell myself is, this is an opportunity for taking action, capitalizing, going for it, and being generous and being grateful. And this all depends, by the way, on the idea that we only win if it's a win-win situation. So if you're working really hard and you're making lots of money but you're miserable, then that's not a win-win situation. The idea is you want to be taking really good care of yourself. You need to put the oxygen mask on yourself first and doing the work to really ask yourself, what's my truth? What's my best self-care? What's my best way that I can feel connected, feel authentic, feel honest, feel real, feel loved, feel loving? That's a deep journey, and it's a journey that's far beyond this idea of just like, just think positive and everything will go well, right? And if somebody says, oh, I hate positive thinking, I think it's a crock, usually that means that there's a deeper journey that's waiting for them with love about finding those deeper authenticities and those deeper opportunities for healing. And my book actually goes into this quite a bit, and it has really specific and practical tools, and a friend of mine actually used the word humane to describe these tools. It has really gentle, kind, but rigorous tools in it. So if this is something that you find very engaging, I would strongly recommend getting the book and starting to read through it, and you're more than welcome to contact me if you have more questions.
Hi, we've got a comment. Great presentation. Thank you, Nora, says Bella. And
Thank you.
she also says, what advice can you give for parents in terms of what to avoid while parenting?
Great question.
Just keep it short though, because we really are getting over time and
Oh,
we're
sorry.
dropping out. We want to get to the end of the presentation for the recording, if nothing else. So
Absolutely. So I talk a lot about this in my book, and in fact, a school psychologist reviewed my book and said she thought it was a great book for parents to be thinking about how to parent kids so that they're better prepared for career and money and everything. You know, I would say that healthy boundaries with love is really where it's at. So as much as you can, try not to yell at the kids. As much as you can, you know, try not to lose your temper. I know that we're all human, so don't beat up on yourself if you do, because if you beat up on yourself for losing your temper, you're actually more likely to lose your temper more often, believe it or not. So be gentle with yourself, be gentle with them, but have boundaries. And so boundaries can look like, you know, okay, sweetie, I hear that you want candy for breakfast, but you're not actually going to get candy for breakfast today. You know, I love you, and you know, it's okay that it's not going to happen. And when your kids go, oh, that's horrible, you say, uh-huh, I hear you that you're uncomfortable, right? So you can be present with their discomfort and then not give into it. And what's remarkable about that is that it teaches your kids to be present with their own discomfort and to learn that discomfort is not something to run from. It's something that can be lived through. And then they can take the appropriate actions. And over time, there's more about this in my book, but over time, just by practicing being with them, like being their early tribe, and showing them that their discomfort is not the worst thing in the world, it doesn't make rules, you know, crumble, so it doesn't make their world fall down, and it doesn't induce necessarily, you know, screaming or shouting or punishment, so it doesn't make their world fall down in a different direction. It's just something that's okay to have, and it's okay not to always get what you want, and it's okay to be thinking and negotiating and moving forward one step at a time. There's a lot more about this in the book, but I want to be respectful of time. Thank you so much, Christine, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
excellent. Was there anything in your final slides you wanted to highlight or?
Nope, I feel really good. I think this is great. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating. You'll get a follow-up email with an evaluation and contact information for Nora and myself. And we hope to see you again for another webinar or in a private session with either one of us, and we'll take it from there. Thanks very much, Nora. This was great.
Thank you, Christine.